The sun beat down on the long, winding driveway as the delivery truck made its way toward the massive house perched on the hill. The place wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Glass and steel stretched across the landscape, cutting a bold figure against the clear blue sky. It was the kind of place that made regular folks feel small just by looking at it, and that was exactly the point. Behind the wheel, Michael wiped sweat from his brow. The air conditioning in his truck had been acting up all week, and today of all days, the hottest day of summer, it had finally given up completely. He'd called his supervisor twice about it, but the answer was always the same. "We'll get to it when we can." Michael checked the delivery details one more time. This wasn't just any drop-off. He was delivering a custom-designed smart home system worth more than he'd make in 3 years. His company had landed a contract with one of the biggest tech firms in the country, and this particular delivery was going to the home of none other than Victoria Reed herself, founder and CEO of Reed Innovations, and one of the richest women in the world. He'd seen her face plenty of times on magazine covers, news segments about powerful women in tech, and even on a billboard downtown advertising her company's latest breakthrough. But seeing someone's face and meeting them in person were two very different things, and Michael couldn't help feeling nervous. As he pulled up to the security gate, a voice crackled through the intercom. "Delivery code?" Michael cleared his throat. "Delivery for Ms. Reed, code 8675309. There was a pause, then the massive iron gate swung open without another word. Michael drove through, following the curved driveway until he reached the main entrance. He parked his truck and hopped out, checking his appearance in the side mirror. His uniform was wrinkled from the heat, and dark patches of sweat had formed under his arms. Not exactly the professional image he'd hoped to present, but there wasn't much he could do about it now. He walked to the back of the truck and began unloading the system components onto a dolly. The package wasn't just heavy, it was awkward, with odd angles that made it difficult to balance. Still, Michael had been doing this job long enough to know how to manage. As he wheeled the dolly toward the front door, it swung open. A thin woman with sharp features and even sharper eyes stood there, tapping something into her phone. She didn't look up as Michael approached. "Ms. Reed?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She glanced up, her eyes quickly scanning him from head to toe before returning to her phone. "Yes, bring it in and set it up in the main living area. Follow me." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked back into the house. Michael followed, careful not to bump the expensive-looking artwork that lined the hallway. The inside of the house was even more impressive than the outside, all clean lines and minimalist design, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the city below. Victoria led him to a spacious living room, dominated by a massive entertainment center. "Put it there," she said, pointing to an empty space beside the sleek television. Michael nodded and began carefully unpacking the system. As he worked, he couldn't help noticing that Victoria never once took her eyes off her phone. It was as if he weren't even there. "This is the latest model," he said, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "It can control everything from your lights and temperature to your security system. It even learns your preferences over time." Victoria made a non-committal sound, not bothering to look up. Michael continued setting up the system, connecting wires and configuring the initial settings. Everything was going smoothly until he noticed a potential issue with one of the components. Ms. Reed? There might be a small problem with the main hub. The diagnostic light is blinking red instead of green, which could indicate a connection issue." For the first time since he'd arrived, Victoria looked up from her phone. Her expression was one of pure annoyance. "I paid $300,000 for this system. I expect it to work perfectly." "I understand," Michael said quickly. "I can try to fix it now, or we can schedule a technician to come out." "Fix it," she cut him off. "That's what you're here for, isn't it?" Her tone made it clear that she considered this beneath her concern. Michael nodded and turned back to the system, his cheeks burning. He'd dealt with difficult customers before, but something about Victoria's dismissive attitude struck a nerve. Maybe it was the way she looked through him rather than at him, or the fact that she clearly assumed he wasn't capable of anything more than basic delivery work. As he examined the hub more closely, Victoria's phone rang. She answered it immediately, her voice changing from cold to honey-sweet in an instant. "Richard?" "Yes, I just got back from Tokyo yesterday. The meeting went exactly as planned. She laughed, a practiced, perfect sound that didn't reach her eyes. They practically begged us to partner with them. Michael tried to focus on the task at hand, but it was hard to ignore Victoria as she paced around the room, discussing merger strategies and profit projections. From what he could gather, Reed Innovations was planning to acquire a smaller tech company, one that had developed some groundbreaking new software. Their engineers are decent, Victoria was saying, but they lack vision. Once we bring them under our umbrella, we can streamline their operation and maximize the potential of their product. There was a pause. No, I don't think we need to keep most of their team on board. We can absorb the essential personnel and let the rest go. The casual way she discussed upending people's livelihoods made Michael's stomach turn. He'd been through something similar 3 years ago, when the engineering firm he worked for was bought out by a larger company. Half the staff, including him, had been laid off overnight, deemed redundant. That's how he'd ended up doing delivery work in the first place. What Victoria didn't know, what most people didn't bother to find out, was that Michael had a master's degree in electrical engineering from one of the top universities in the country. But in today's job market, a degree only got you so far without connections, and Michael hadn't been able to find work in his field since the layoff. As Victoria continued her phone conversation, Michael identified the problem with the hub. It wasn't a major issue, just a loose connection in one of the ports. He could fix it easily enough, but he was also noticing other potential issues with the system's setup. Whoever had designed the integration plan hadn't accounted for the specific layout of Victoria's home, and there were efficiency problems that would likely cause frustration down the line. He was debating whether to mention this when Victoria ended her call and turned her attention back to him. Well, is it fixed? The immediate issue, yes, Michael replied. But there are some other potential problems with the overall setup that might— I don't need the details, Victoria interrupted. Just make it work. She glanced at her watch. I have another meeting in 20 minutes. Will you be done by then? I can fix the current problem, but for optimal performance, the system really needs— Look, Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension. Just do your job and fix the thing you're supposed to fix. If there are other issues, the company can send an actual technician to deal with them. Michael felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. I understand. Victoria looked him up and down again, a small humorless smile playing at her lips. Fix it properly and I'll call you boss, she said, her tone making it clear she thought this was impossible. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, What was your name again? Michael, he replied evenly. Well, Michael, I'm sure you're doing your best. The way she said it made it sound more like an insult than encouragement. Just finish up quickly and try not to break anything else. With that, she walked out of the room, leaving Michael alone with the half-assembled system and his simmering frustration. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that this was just one delivery, just one customer, just one day. But as he looked around at the perfectly curated living space, at the evidence of wealth and privilege surrounding him, he made a decision. Victoria Reed might see him as just a delivery guy, someone beneath her notice or respect. But he knew what he was capable of, and more importantly, he knew exactly how this system should be configured to work at its best. As he returned to work, a plan began forming in his mind. Victoria had unknowingly issued a challenge with her dismissive comment, and despite his better judgment, Michael found himself determined to meet it. Not for her approval, he didn't care about that, but to prove something to himself. By the time Victoria returned, he had fixed the immediate issue and packed up his tools. She barely acknowledged him as she signed off on the delivery form. The system should be working now, Michael said. Have a good day, Ms. Reed. She didn't respond, already back to tapping away on her phone. Michael left the house and walked back to his truck, his mind still turning over possibilities. The smart home system as it was currently configured would work, but it was far from optimal. And Michael knew exactly how to make it better. As he drove away from the mansion, instead of feeling defeated by Victoria's treatment, he felt a spark of determination. She had no idea who he really was or what he was capable of, but she was about to find out. Michael drove away from Victoria Reed's mansion with his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his KT knuckles turned white. The air in the truck was stifling without the air conditioning, but he barely noticed the heat. His mind was racing, replaying the interaction over and over again. "Fix it and I'll call you boss." The words echoed in his head, along with the dismissive look in Victoria's eyes, as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong address. He'd dealt with rude customers before. It came with the territory. But something about this particular encounter had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't ignore. Maybe it was because he'd spent the last 3 years watching his career dreams slip further and further away. Maybe it was because he'd sent out hundreds of job applications, only to be told he was either overqualified or that they'd gone in another direction. Or maybe it was simply that he was tired, bone deep, tired of being underestimated. By the time he pulled up to his small apartment complex, Michael had made up his mind. He was going to take Victoria Reed's challenge, whether she knew she'd issued one or not. His apartment was a stark contrast to the mansion he'd just left, a one-bedroom unit with mismatched furniture and bare walls. But the small second bedroom he used as an office was a different story. Here, Michael had created his own world, a space filled with computers, tools, and half-finished projects. This was where he spent most of his free time, tinkering with ideas that might one day become his ticket back into the industry he loved. Michael sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. He hadn't mentioned it to Victoria, but the smart home system her company had purchased was actually one he was quite familiar with. In fact, he'd interviewed for a position on the design team just last year. He hadn't gotten the job, but he'd studied the system extensively in preparation for the interview. He began typing, pulling up the system specifications and reviewing what he knew about its capabilities and limitations. The basic issue he'd fixed at Victoria's house was simple enough, just a loose connection. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the entire setup was flawed. The system was designed to be one size fits all, but Victoria's house was anything but standard. The layout, the unusual architecture, the extensive glass surfaces, all of these factors meant that the default configuration would lead to inefficiencies. The system would work, but it wouldn't work well. Michael leaned back in his chair, considering his options. The smart thing would be to forget about it. Move on, focus on his own life and goals. But the memory of Victoria's condescension kept pushing him in another direction. He checked his schedule for the next day. He had deliveries in the morning, but his afternoon was clear. And he still had access to Victoria's property. The system came with a 48-hour setup window, during which the delivery personnel could return to address any initial issues. It was risky. If he got caught making unauthorized modifications to a customer's system, he could lose his job. But something told him Victoria Reed wasn't the type to report problems to customer service. She was much more likely to just demand that someone else fix whatever wasn't working. Michael spent the rest of the evening researching and planning. By the time he went to bed, he had a clear idea of what he needed to do. The standard system was good, but with a few key modifications, it could be exceptional, perfectly tailored to Victoria's specific needs and her home's unique characteristics. The next morning, Michael completed his scheduled deliveries as quickly as possible. His supervisor, Tom, noticed his hurry. "Hot date tonight?" Tom asked with a grin as Michael rushed to complete his paperwork. "Something like that," Michael replied. "Mind if I take off early?" "All my deliveries are done," Tom shrugged. "Sure, why not? You've been putting in the extra hours lately anyway." Michael thanked him and hurried out to his truck. He had stopped at an electronics store on his lunch break and picked up a few components he might need. Nothing fancy, just some adapters and specialized connectors that would help optimize the system. As he drove back toward Victoria's neighborhood, he felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. What he was about to do was unorthodox, to say the least, but it was also a chance to do what he loved, to solve a complex problem and create something that worked beautifully. When he arrived at the security gate, he took a deep breath and pressed the intercom button. "Delivery follow-up for Ms. Reed," he said confidently. "We have a 48-hour window to ensure the system is functioning properly." There was a pause, and then the gate swung open without question. Michael felt a twinge of guilt for the slight deception, but he pushed it aside. He wasn't doing anything malicious, quite the opposite, in fact. He parked his truck in the same spot as before and walked up to the front door. He rang the bell, half expecting Victoria to answer and immediately send him away. But instead, an older woman in a housekeeper's uniform opened the door. "Yes?" she asked, looking confused. "I'm from the delivery company," Michael explained. "I need to check on the smart home system we installed yesterday. It's standard procedure to make sure everything is working correctly." The housekeeper nodded. "Ms. Reed isn't home. She's at meetings all day." "That's fine," Michael said, feeling relieved. "I just need access to the main control hub. I won't disturb anything else." The housekeeper let him in and showed him to the living room where he'd set up the system the day before. "I'll be cleaning upstairs if you need anything," she said before leaving him alone. Michael set down his bag and got to work immediately. First, he ran a full diagnostic on the system to get a baseline reading of its performance. As he suspected, there were several inefficiencies in the setup. The motion sensors were placed according to the standard template, which didn't account for the unusual layout of Victoria's living space. The temperature controls were set to the factory defaults, which wouldn't adapt well to the heat gain from the extensive glass windows. And the security systems were configured in a way that would generate false alarms at least once a week. Michael began carefully reconfiguring each component. He adjusted the sensor placements to better cover the actual living patterns in the space. He reprogrammed the temperature controls to account for the sun's movement throughout the day. And he completely redesigned the security protocols to be both more effective and less intrusive. As he worked, he lost track of time. This was what he was meant to do: solving problems, making systems work better, creating something elegant out of something merely functional. For the first time in months, he felt fully alive, fully engaged. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice the housekeeper checking on him occasionally, watching with curious eyes as he transformed the system. By late afternoon, he had made significant progress, but there was still more he wanted to do. The housekeeper approached him as he was packing up his tools. "You've been working for hours," she observed. "Is something wrong with the system?" "No, not wrong," Michael explained. "I'm just making sure it works as well as possible. Ms. Reed deserves the best." The housekeeper gave him a knowing look. "She can be demanding," Michael smiled diplomatically. "Most successful people are. Will you need to come back tomorrow?" she asked. Michael hesitated. He wasn't scheduled for any deliveries in this area the next day, and coming back would mean going out of his way. But he wasn't finished yet, and leaving the job half done went against everything he believed in. "Yes, if that's all right," he said finally. "There are a few more adjustments I'd like to make." The housekeeper nodded. "Ms. Reed will be away on business for the next 2 days. You can come anytime." "Thank you," Michael said, genuinely grateful. "I appreciate it." As he drove home that evening, Michael felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in a long time. He knew what Victoria Reed thought of him, just another service worker, someone beneath her notice. But he was about to show her what he was really capable of. That night, he stayed up late sketching out ideas for further improvements to the system. The basic framework was already in place, but there were additional features he could add. Things that weren't part of the standard package, but that would make the system truly exceptional. The next day, Michael called in sick to work. It was the first time he'd ever done so when he wasn't actually ill, and he felt guilty about it, but he needed the time to complete what he'd started. He spent the entire day at Victoria's house, working methodically through his list of enhancements. He added voice recognition software that would learn to distinguish between different speakers. He programmed custom lighting scenes that would automatically adjust based on the time of day and activity. He even set up a specialized alert system that would notify Victoria of any potential maintenance issues before they became problems. By the time he finished, the system was barely recognizable as the same one he'd delivered 2 days earlier. It was now a fully customized, integrated smart home ecosystem that anticipated needs, learned preferences, and operated with an efficiency that the factory version couldn't come close to matching. Michael ran one final diagnostic to make sure everything was working perfectly. The system passed with flying colors, performing better than even he had expected. As he packed up his tools for the last time, the housekeeper appeared in the doorway. "All finished?" she asked. "Yes," Michael replied, feeling a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. "Everything should be working perfectly, no?" The housekeeper smiled. "I'm sure Ms. Reed will be pleased, though she may not show it." Michael nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "That's okay. I didn't do it for thanks." As he drove away from the mansion for what he assumed would be the last time, Michael felt oddly at peace. He had no idea how Victoria would react to the changes he'd made, if she'd even notice them at all. But that wasn't really the point. For 2 days he had been an engineer again. He had used his skills, his knowledge, his creativity, and whatever happened next, no one could take that away from him. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that his work was about to set in motion a chain of events that would change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. Victoria. Reed was on her way home from a business trip, expecting to return to the same house she had left. But what awaited her was something entirely different. A home that seemed to understand her, anticipate her needs, and respond to her presence in ways that would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about the people she so casually dismissed. Victoria. Reed stepped out of her sleek black car and glanced up at her home. She was exhausted after 3 days of nonstop meetings in New York, whining and dining potential investors, fending off questions about her company's aggressive acquisition strategy, and finalizing the details of a new partnership that would further cement Reed Innovation's position at the top of the tech industry. All she wanted now was a hot bath, a glass of wine, and silence. The thought of having to deal with any household issues, especially that temperamental new smart home system, was enough to make her grind her teeth in frustration. "Will you need anything else tonight, Ms. Reed?" her driver asked as he set her luggage by the front door. "No, thank you, William. You can go home now." William nodded and returned to the car. Victoria watched him drive away, then turned to face her door. She took out her phone, opened the home security app, and frowned. Something was different about the interface. It seemed cleaner, more intuitive. Had there been an update? She pressed her thumb to the fingerprint scanner beside the door, expecting the usual 3-second delay before the lock disengaged. To her surprise, the door unlocked immediately, accompanied by a soft chime. "Welcome home, Victoria," a pleasant, neutral voice said as she stepped inside. "The current temperature is 72 degrees. Would you prefer it warmer or cooler?" Victoria stopped in her tracks. She hadn't activated the voice control feature. In fact, she distinctly remembered telling the sales representative that she found such features intrusive and unnecessary. "Who authorized voice activation?" she demanded. "Voice control was enabled during system optimization," the system responded. "Would you like me to disable this feature?" Victoria was about to say yes when she realized something odd. The house was already dimly lit with a warm amber glow that was neither too bright nor too dark. The temperature was perfect, cool enough to be refreshing after the hot day outside, but not cold enough to be uncomfortable. And very faintly in the background she could hear the gentle notes of a piano concerto. Chopin, her favorite composer to listen to after a long day. "System, who made these changes?" she asked, setting down her purse and walking further into the house. System optimization was performed by service personnel within the standard 48-hour setup window, the voice replied. "Complete modification logs are available for review." Victoria frowned. She hadn't been informed about any additional setup work. Then again, she hadn't exactly been paying close attention when that delivery person had explained the system details. What was his name again? Michael, she thought. The one she'd dismissed so quickly. As she moved through the house, she noticed more changes. When she entered the kitchen, the lights brightened automatically to the perfect level for the space. The refrigerator display lit up, showing her a reminder that she was low on her favorite sparkling water and suggesting she add it to her grocery delivery service. "Would you like me to order more San Pellegrino?" the system asked. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Yes," she said cautiously, "order placed. Delivery scheduled for tomorrow morning between 9 and 11 a.m. She opened the refrigerator and found a bottle of chilled Sauvignon Blanc, her preferred wind-down drink after business trips. How had the system known that? As she poured herself a glass, the house continued to adjust around her. The lighting shifted subtly as the sun began to set outside. The temperature adjusted by 0.5 degree to compensate for the changing conditions. Even the music seemed to follow her from room to room, never too loud, never too soft. By the time Victoria made her way to her master bathroom, she was both impressed and unsettled. The system was anticipating her needs with an accuracy that seemed almost impossible for a newly installed technology. The bathroom lights came on at a dim, relaxing level. The large soaking tub began to fill with water that was exactly the temperature she preferred. On the vanity mirror, a display appeared showing her schedule for the next day, with a subtle reminder that she should try to get at least 6 hours of sleep tonight given her 7 a.m. conference call with Tokyo. "Would you like me to activate the aromatherapy feature?" the system asked. "Yes," Victoria replied, unable to keep the wonder out of her voice. She hadn't even known the system included aromatherapy controls. A gentle scent of lavender began to fill the room as Victoria undressed and slipped into the perfectly prepared bath. For the first time in weeks, she felt her tightly wound muscles begin to relax. The water was the perfect temperature, the lighting was ideal, and the music had shifted to a more serene composition that complemented the peaceful atmosphere. Despite herself, Victoria was impressed. This was far beyond what she had expected from the system. It wasn't just functional, it was thoughtful, intuitive, almost human in its ability to anticipate and respond to her needs. As she soaked in the tub, Victoria's analytical mind began to work. The system she'd purchased was top of the line, but the sales representative had made no mention of these kinds of personalized features. This level of customization would typically require weeks of learning user preferences and patterns, yet somehow her system was already perfectly attuned to her likes and dislikes. After her bath, wrapped in a plush robe, Victoria made her way to the home office. "System, show me the modification logs," she commanded. The large screen on her wall came to life, displaying a detailed list of changes made to the original setup. The logs were comprehensive, showing hundreds of adjustments, both large and small, sensor recalibrations, temperature control algorithms, security protocol updates, lighting scene creations. The list went on and on. Victoria scrolled through the logs with increasing amazement. What she was looking at wasn't just a basic setup job. It was a complete overhaul of the system, tailored specifically to her home, her habits, and her preferences. This kind of customization would typically cost tens of thousands of dollars and require a team of specialized technicians, and according to the logs, it had all been done by one person, a delivery driver named Michael Washington. Victoria sat back in her chair, trying to reconcile this information with her memory of the man who had delivered the system. She had barely looked at him, dismissing him as just another service worker doing a basic job, but clearly he was something else entirely. She pulled up her phone and opened her email, searching for the delivery confirmation. There it was, a standard form with Michael's employee ID and contact information. On impulse, she ran a search on his name, expecting to find little of interest. What she found instead left her staring at her screen in disbelief. Michael Washington, age 32. Master's degree in electrical engineering from Georgia Tech. Former senior systems engineer at Horizon Technologies until the company was acquired 3 years ago. Several patents to his name. Excellent references from former colleagues and professors. Victoria felt a twinge of something unfamiliar, a mixture of embarrassment and regret. She had treated this man like he was beneath her notice when, in reality, he possessed skills and knowledge that put him in the top percentile of his field. The question was, why was someone with his qualifications delivering packages? She dug deeper, pulling up news articles about the Horizon acquisition. The story was all too familiar. A larger company buying out a smaller, innovative firm, keeping the patents and technologies while discarding most of the staff. Michael had been one of dozens of engineers laid off in the streamlining process. The irony wasn't lost on Victoria. Her own company had conducted similar acquisitions, making the same cold calculations about which employees to keep and which to let go. It was just business, she had always told herself. Nothing personal. But now, looking at the evidence of Michael's brilliance literally surrounding her in the form of this exquisitely customized system, she found herself questioning that logic. How many other talented people had been cast aside in the name of corporate efficiency? How much potential was being wasted because someone like her hadn't bothered to look beyond job titles and first impressions? Victoria's thoughts were interrupted by a gentle chime from the system. Reminder, you have an early conference call tomorrow. Based on your typical sleep patterns, it is recommended that you retire within the next 30 minutes to ensure adequate rest. She smiled despite herself. Even the reminder was perfectly calibrated, not pushy or intrusive. Just a gentle suggestion based on data the system had somehow gathered about her sleep habits. System, "Who programmed you to monitor my sleep patterns?" she asked. Sleep pattern monitoring was enabled as part of the wellness package integration. The system replied. This feature uses non-invasive environmental sensors to estimate optimal rest periods based on your schedule and typical behavior patterns. No cameras or microphones are activated in private areas. Would you like to disable this feature? No, Victoria said thoughtfully. Keep it active. She rose from her desk and prepared for bed, still mulling over the revelations of the evening. As she slipped between the sheets, the room temperature adjusted slightly for optimal sleeping conditions, and the lights dimmed gradually, mimicking a natural sunset. Good night, Victoria, the system said softly. Your first appointment tomorrow is at 7 a.m. The weather forecast calls for rain, so I've adjusted your morning alarm to allow extra commute time. Would you like me to prepare coffee at 6:15 a.m.? Yes, please, Victoria replied, marveling at how natural it felt to converse with the system. As she drifted off to sleep, her thoughts returned to Michael Washington, the delivery driver she had so casually dismissed. Fix it and I'll call you boss, she had said mockingly, never imagining he would take her words as a challenge. But he had fixed it in ways she hadn't even known were possible. And in doing so, he had shown her something about herself that was both uncomfortable and necessary to see. Tomorrow, Victoria decided, as sleep began to claim her, she would need to find Michael Washington. Not to reprimand him for making unauthorized modifications, though technically she could have, but to understand why. Why had he gone so far beyond what was required? Why had he poured his obvious talent and expertise into a task that would bring him no recognition or reward? And perhaps most importantly, what else might he be capable of, if given the right opportunity? The system dimmed the final light, leaving Victoria in comfortable darkness. Outside, rain began to fall softly, creating a soothing backdrop to the quiet hum of a home that now seemed more alive, more aware, more in tune with its owner than she had ever thought possible. In her last moments of consciousness, Victoria made a mental note. Find Michael Washington, and when she did, make good on her flippant promise, because anyone who could transform a house into a home, this perfectly deserved not just recognition, but respect. And respect was something Victoria Reed rarely gave to anyone, especially someone she had so thoroughly underestimated. The next morning, Victoria woke to the gentle sound of rainfall and soft classical music gradually increasing in volume. The room's blackout curtains slowly parted, allowing a muted gray light to fill the space. On her bedside table, a display lit up showing the time, weather, and her schedule for the day. Good morning, Victoria, the system said. It's 6 a.m. Your coffee will be ready in 15 minutes. And the bathroom temperature has been adjusted for your shower. Victoria sat up, still marveling at how perfectly the system anticipated her needs. After a refreshing shower and a cup of perfectly brewed coffee, she felt ready to tackle the day, starting with finding the man responsible for this transformation. System, display contact information for Michael Washington, she commanded as she finished her breakfast. A moment later, Michael's employee file appeared on the kitchen display. Victoria studied it, noting his current employer, standard delivery services, and his work schedule. According to the file, he should be on duty today, making deliveries in the downtown business district. Victoria made a quick decision. Call Robert, she said, and the system immediately dialed her assistant. Good morning, Ms. Reed, Robert answered promptly. Robert, I need you to reschedule my morning meetings. Something important has come up. There was a brief pause. Victoria Reed never rescheduled meetings, especially not on short notice. Of course, Ms. Reed, any particular reason I should give? Personal matter. Non-negotiable, Victoria replied crisply. And have the car ready in 20 minutes. After ending the call, Victoria dressed quickly in a sleek charcoal suit, professional but not ostentatious. She wasn't entirely sure why she felt compelled to seek out Michael Washington in person, but something told her this wasn't a conversation to be had over the phone. As her driver navigated the rain-slicked streets of the city, Victoria reviewed what she knew about Michael. His credentials were impressive, the kind that would typically land someone a high-paying position at a top tech company. Yet here he was, delivering packages. The disconnect bothered her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. We've arrived. Ms. Reed, her driver announced as they pulled up to a nondescript warehouse building with standard delivery services painted on the side. Wait here, William. I shouldn't be long. Victoria stepped out into the light rain and walked purposefully toward the entrance. The receptionist looked up in surprise as she approached. Victoria Reed was immediately recognizable to anyone who followed business news. "I'm looking for Michael Washington," Victoria said without preamble. "Is he available?" The receptionist blinked in confusion. Let me check if he's in yet." She picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "Tom, there's someone here for Michael." "Yes, she says it's important." She glanced up at Victoria nervously. "Your name, ma'am?" "Victoria Reed." The receptionist's eyes widened as she relayed the name. A moment later, a middle-aged man in a supervisor's uniform hurried out to the reception area. "Ms. Reed, what an unexpected honor. I'm Tom Wilson, operations manager. How can I help you today? I need to speak with Michael Washington. It's regarding a delivery he made to my residence." Tom's expression shifted to concern. "Was there a problem with the delivery?" "I assure you, Michael is one of our most reliable employees." "No problem at all. Quite the opposite, in fact." Victoria maintained her composed demeanor. "Is he available?" Tom checked his clipboard. "He's actually out on his morning route right now, but I can call him back if it's urgent." Victoria considered this. "Where is he delivering currently?" "Let me check." Tom scrolled through his tablet. "He's making deliveries in the Westside Business Park, about 15 minutes from here. I'll find him there then." "Which building specifically?" Tom hesitated, clearly wondering why a billionaire CEO would track down a delivery driver in person, but he provided the address. "The Reed Tower, actually. Your company's satellite office." Victoria couldn't help but smile at the irony. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Wilson." Back in the car, Victoria directed William to drive to the Reed Tower. Her mind was racing with questions. What would she say to Michael when she found him? How would she explain her presence? And why did she feel so compelled to speak with him in the first place? The Reed Tower was a gleaming 30-story structure in the heart of the business district. Not Reed Innovations headquarters, but an important satellite office housing several subsidiary operations. As Victoria's car pulled up to the entrance, she spotted a standard delivery services truck parked in the loading zone. "Wait here," she instructed William before stepping out into the rain. Again. The security guard at the front desk straightened immediately when he saw her. "Ms. Reed, we weren't expecting you today." "I'm not here on official business, James," she replied, reading his name tag. "I'm looking for a delivery person, Michael Washington. Has he been through here yet?" "Yes, ma'am. He went up to floor 18 about 10 minutes ago. Would you like me to call up and have someone send him down?" "No, thank you. I'll go up myself." The elevator ride gave Victoria time to collect her thoughts. What was she doing, tracking down a delivery driver like this? It wasn't like her to be so impulsive, yet here she was, driven by curiosity and something else. A need to understand not just the how of what Michael had done, but the why. When the elevator doors opened on the 18th floor, Victoria stepped into a bustling office space. Staff members did double takes as they recognized her, some nudging colleagues and whispering behind their hands. Victoria ignored them, scanning the area for Michael. She spotted him near the reception desk, chatting amiably with the receptionist as she signed for a package. He was dressed in the same brown uniform he'd worn to her house, his posture relaxed and professional. Victoria approached quietly, waiting until he had finished his transaction before speaking. "Mr. Washington?" Michael turned, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to surprise as he recognized her. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Nor I you," Victoria replied. "Although I understand you've made quite an impression at my home." Michael's expression remained guarded. "I'm not sure what you mean." Victoria noted the receptionist and several nearby employees watching their interaction with undisguised curiosity. "Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private," she suggested. Michael hesitated, then nodded. "I still have deliveries to make. I'll speak with your supervisor. This won't take long." Victoria led the way to a small conference room at the end of the hall. Once inside, she closed the door and turned to face Michael. Up close, she noticed details she had missed during their brief encounter at her home. The intelligence in his eyes, the quiet confidence in his bearing, the way he assessed her with equal measure of caution and curiosity. "My smart home system has been completely transformed," Victoria said, without preamble, far beyond the standard installation parameters. According to the logs, you're responsible. Michael met her gaze steadily. Yes. Victoria waited for him to elaborate, to explain, or perhaps apologize, but he remained silent. Why? She asked finally. You went well beyond your job requirements. You put in hours of additional work for no extra compensation. Why? Michael considered her question for a moment before answering. Because I could. Because the system as originally configured wasn't living up to its potential. He paused. And because you said if I fixed it, you'd call me boss. Victoria felt a flush of embarrassment at having her dismissive words quoted back to her. You took that seriously? Not the way you meant it, Michael replied. But yes, I took the challenge seriously. The system had flaws that I knew how to correct. So I corrected them. How did you know my preferences? The system seems to anticipate exactly what I want before I even ask for it. Michael's expression softened slightly. I did my research. Your interviews, articles about your work habits, social media mentions of your preferences. Plus your housekeeper was helpful. She knows your routines better than anyone. Victoria was impressed despite herself. Most people in your position wouldn't have bothered. Most people in my position wouldn't have had the skills to make those improvements, Michael pointed out. I happen to have both the skills and the motivation. And what motivation is that exactly? Michael was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how honest to be. Pride in my work, he said finally, and perhaps a desire to be seen for what I can do, not just what my current job title suggests I can do. Victoria nodded slowly, beginning to understand. You have an engineering degree from Georgia Tech. You held a senior position at Horizon Technologies before their acquisition. Yet now you deliver packages. Why? A flicker of something, anger? Frustration? Crossed Michael's face. You know why, Ms. Reed. Your company has conducted similar acquisitions. When larger companies absorb smaller ones, they keep the patents and discard the people. After Horizon, I sent out hundreds of applications. But the market was saturated with displaced engineers just like me, all fighting for the same few positions. So you took a delivery job. I took what was available, Michael corrected her, and I kept applying for engineering positions. But after a while, the gap in my resume grew larger and the callbacks became fewer. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Victoria felt an uncomfortable twinge of recognition. How many times had her own company passed over resumes with employment gaps, regardless of the qualifications listed? Yet you maintained your skills, she observed. Well enough to completely reconfigure a cutting-edge smart home system. Michael's expression relaxed slightly. Engineering isn't just what I do, Ms. Reed, it's who I am, whether I'm being paid for it or not. Victoria studied him thoughtfully. There was no self-pity in his voice, no resentment, just a clear-eyed assessment of his situation. And beneath it all, an unmistakable pride in his abilities that had nothing to do with job titles or paychecks. I owe you an apology, Mr. Washington, Victoria said suddenly, surprising herself as much as him. I made assumptions based on your current position. I was dismissive and condescending. I was wrong. Michael's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded in acknowledgement. Apology accepted. And I believe I also owe you compensation for the additional work you performed on my system. The customization you provided would typically cost tens of thousands of dollars. That's not necessary. I insist. Victoria interrupted. I don't accept free work, Mr. Washington. It creates imbalanced power dynamics. A small smile played at the corner of Michael's mouth. Is that what you're concerned about? Power dynamics? Victoria found herself returning his smile. Fair point. But my offer stands. If you want to compensate me, Michael said after a moment's thought, there is something you could do. Name it. Write me a recommendation. On company letterhead with your signature, attesting to my technical abilities based on what you've seen of my work. Victoria blinked in surprise. Of all the things he might have asked for, money, a job, connections, this was unexpected.
That's all?
A recommendation from Victoria Reed would open doors that have been closed to me for 3 years. Michael explained simply. That's worth more than any one-time payment. Victoria considered his request. It was both reasonable and clever, leveraging her position and reputation to rebuild his own. It showed foresight, practicality, and ambition, qualities she respected. Agreed, she said with a decisive nod. I'll have it sent to you by the end of day. Thank you, Michael replied, his professional demeanor softening slightly. I appreciate it. There was a moment of silence between them, not uncomfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts and reassessments. I should get back to my deliveries, Michael said finally. My supervisor will be wondering where I am. Of course, Victoria replied. I've taken enough of your time. They walked back to the elevator together, drawing curious glances from the office staff. As they waited for the elevator to arrive, Victoria found herself thinking about the system Michael had created in her home. How it anticipated needs, learned preferences, and adapted to changing circumstances. How it made her life better in ways she hadn't even realized were possible. The elevator arrived and Michael stepped inside. As the doors began to close, Victoria made a split-second decision. Mr. Washington, she called, causing him to hold the elevator door. Are you available for a meeting tomorrow? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Michael looked at her with curiosity. What kind of meeting? A professional one, Victoria replied. About your future. A mix of wariness and interest crossed his face. I can make myself available. Good. My office, Reed Innovations headquarters. 9 a.m., Michael nodded. I'll be there. As the elevator doors closed between them, Victoria stood motionless in the hallway, processing what had just happened. She had come here intending only to satisfy her curiosity about the man who had transformed her smart home system. Instead, she found herself offering him, what exactly, a job? An opportunity? She wasn't entirely sure yet. But one thing was clear as she made her way back to the lobby. Michael Washington was exactly the kind of talent her company needed. Innovative, meticulous, and determined to excel regardless of circumstances. The fact that he had been overlooked for so long was not just his loss, but the industry's. And perhaps, Victoria thought as she stepped back into the rain, it was time to change that. Not just for Michael Washington, but for others like him, people whose abilities and potential were hidden behind the wrong job titles, the wrong backgrounds, or simply the wrong first impressions. It was a change that would need to start with her. Michael stood outside the towering glass headquarters of Reed Innovations, adjusting his tie nervously. He had called in sick to work again, something he was starting to feel guilty about, but this meeting could change everything. He had spent the previous evening researching Victoria Reed's company in depth, preparing for whatever opportunity might present itself today. He had also received her recommendation letter, delivered by courier to his apartment. The letter had been more generous than he'd expected, a detailed account of his work on her smart home system, praising his innovation, technical expertise, and attention to detail. It was the kind of endorsement that could indeed open doors just as he'd hoped. But now, as he entered the sleek lobby with its soaring ceilings and minimalist design, he wondered what Victoria Reed really wanted from him. A job offer seemed the most likely scenario, but something told him there might be more to it than that. Good morning, he said to the receptionist. Michael Washington to see Victoria Reed. I have an appointment at 9. The receptionist smiled warmly. Yes, Mr. Washington. Ms. Reed is expecting you. Please take the executive elevator to the 50th floor. Michael rode up in silence, using the time to calm his nerves. This was an opportunity, he reminded himself. One he had earned through his own merit and hard work. When the elevator doors opened, he was greeted by a sleek reception area with views of the entire city. A young man in an impeccable suit approached. Mr. Washington, I'm Robert, Ms. Reed's assistant. Please follow me. Robert led him down a hallway lined with abstract art to a set of double doors at the end. He knocked once, then opened them. Mr. Washington is here, Ms. Reed. Thank you, Robert. Please come in, Mr. Washington. Victoria's office was impressive but not ostentatious. A large space with floor-to-ceiling windows, a sleek desk, and a comfortable sitting area near a fireplace. Victoria herself stood by the windows looking out at the city below. She turned as Michael entered, and he was struck again by her commanding presence. Thank you for coming, she said, gesturing to the sitting area. Would you like coffee? Yes, thank you, Michael replied, taking a seat in one of the leather armchairs. Victoria nodded to Robert, who disappeared, returning moments later with 2 cups of coffee. Once they were alone again, Victoria took the seat across from Michael. I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here, she began. I have some theories, Michael replied with a small smile. Victoria returned his smile, and Michael noticed that it seemed more genuine than the calculating expression she had worn during their first meeting. I'm sure you do. But before we get to that, I'd like to hear more about your background. Your resume tells one story, but I suspect there's more to it. Michael took a sip of his coffee, considering his response. What would you like to know? Let's start with Horizon Technologies. You were a senior systems engineer there for 5 years before the acquisition. Tell me about your work. For the next 20 minutes, Michael found himself discussing his career in detail, the projects he had led at Horizon, the patents he had contributed to, the innovations he had helped develop. Victoria asked insightful questions that revealed her own technical expertise, pushing him to explain complex concepts in depth. And after the layoff? She asked finally. You mentioned sending out hundreds of applications. Michael nodded. 347 to be exact. I had 28 interviews, made it to the final round 12 times, but always lost out to someone who was currently employed in the field. He kept his tone matter-of-fact, without bitterness. After the first year, the calls slowed down. After 2 years, they stopped entirely. So you took the delivery job. I took several jobs, actually. Retail, customer service, gig work. The delivery position was the most recent and the most flexible, allowing me time to work on my own projects. Victoria leaned forward slightly. What kind of projects? Michael hesitated. He had been developing his own ideas for years, working nights and weekends in his small home office, but he had learned to be cautious about sharing those ideas. Various things, he said vaguely. Home automation, mostly. Victoria studied him for a moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. She rose and walked to her desk, picking up a tablet. When she returned, she handed it to Michael. This is a non-disclosure agreement. I'd like you to read and sign it before we continue. Michael raised an eyebrow but took the tablet. The NDA was standard, prohibiting him from sharing anything discussed in this meeting with outside parties. He signed it and handed the tablet back. Now, Victoria said, setting the tablet aside, tell me about your current project, the one you're really passionate about. Michael was surprised by her perception but decided to take the risk. I've been developing a new kind of interface for smart home systems. The current models, even high-end ones like yours, are still fundamentally reactive. They respond to commands or pre-programmed patterns. My system is truly adaptive, learning not just preferences but contexts and intentions, like what you implemented in my home, Victoria observed. That was just a small demonstration of the concept, Michael explained. Warming to the subject, a full implementation would be much more comprehensive. Imagine a home that doesn't just respond to commands but anticipates needs based on a deep understanding of patterns and contexts. A system that recognizes not just what you ask for, but what you need before you even know you need it. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. And how close are you to a working prototype? I have a functional system running in my apartment. Limited by my budget and computing resources, of course. But the core algorithms are solid. With proper development resources, it could be market-ready in 6 to 8 months. Have you tried to secure funding? Michael smiled wryly. Venture capitalists aren't exactly lining up to hear pitches from delivery drivers without corporate backing. Victoria acknowledged this with a slight incline of her head. Fair enough. She took a sip of her coffee. So here's what I'm thinking, Mr. Washington. I could offer you a position at Reed Innovations, a good position, with excellent pay and benefits working on our smart home division. Michael waited, sensing there was more. Or, Victoria continued, I could offer you something else entirely. A partnership. A partnership? Michael repeated, not sure he had heard correctly. Reed Innovations has been looking to expand our smart home division. What you've described and what you demonstrated in my home is exactly the direction we need to move in. But rather than simply hiring you and absorbing your ideas into our corporate structure, I'm proposing a joint venture. Your technology, our resources, and market reach. Michael was stunned. That's not what I was expecting. No, I imagine it isn't, Victoria said with a small smile. But I've been doing some thinking since our last conversation about talent, opportunity, and the way we structure our business relationships. She rose and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. For years, Reed Innovations has followed the standard corporate playbook. Acquire smaller companies, keep their intellectual property, discard what we don't need, including people. It's efficient in the short term, but I'm beginning to question whether it's optimal in the long run. She turned back to face him. What if instead of absorbing innovative thinkers, we partnered with them? Created structures that allowed them to maintain their identity and vision, while providing the resources they need to succeed. Michael considered her words carefully. It sounds ideal in theory, but how would it work in practice? What would this partnership actually look like? We would establish a new entity. Let's call it Washington Home Intelligence as a majority-owned subsidiary of Reed Innovations. You would serve as CEO, with full creative and technical control. We would provide funding, manufacturing capabilities, marketing support, and distribution channels. In return, we would receive a percentage of revenue and certain licensing rights. Michael's mind was racing with possibilities. And the intellectual property. Joint ownership with exclusive licensing to the new entity, Victoria replied promptly. You retain creator credit and a significant stake in how your technology evolves. It was a generous offer, far more generous than anything Michael had dared to hope for. But something still didn't add up. Why? He asked finally. Why offer a partnership instead of just hiring me? You could save yourself a lot of money and complications. Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering her response. Because I recognize that innovation doesn't thrive under traditional corporate structures. Because your work in my home showed me what happens when talented people are given the freedom to create on their own terms. She paused. And because I was wrong about you, and it made me wonder how many others I've been wrong about too. Michael studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. Victoria Reed was known for her business acumen, not her sentimentality. Yet there seemed to be genuine reflection in her words. I'd need to see the detailed terms, he said cautiously. Of course, I'll have our legal team draft a proposal for your review. Victoria returned to her seat. But before we get too far into specifics, I want to make sure we're aligned on vision. What do you see for the future of home automation? For the next hour, they discussed technical possibilities, market opportunities, and development challenges. Michael found himself engaged in the kind of high-level technical conversation he hadn't experienced in years, with someone who not only understood his ideas but could challenge and enhance them. Victoria was clearly brilliant, not just as a businesswoman but as a technologist in her own right. I think we're on the same page, Victoria said finally. So what do you think? Are you interested in exploring this partnership? Michael took a deep breath. Yes, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Yes, I am. Excellent. Victoria stood, signaling the end of the meeting. I'll have Robert send you the preliminary paperwork by the end of the day. In the meantime, I suggest you give notice at your current job. Michael stood as well, feeling slightly dazed by the sudden shift in his fortunes. I will, thank you, Ms. Reed. Victoria, she corrected him. If we're going to be partners, we should be on a first-name basis. Victoria, Michael nodded, extending his hand. And I'm Michael. They shook hands, and Michael couldn't help but think about their first meeting. How differently she had looked at him then, how dismissively she had treated him. The contrast was striking. One more thing, Victoria said as she walked him to the door. That comment I made at my house about calling you boss if you fix the system. Michael smiled. I remember. Well, technically, as CEO of your own company, you will be the boss, Victoria pointed out. So I suppose I'll be keeping that promise after all. Michael laughed. I suppose you will. As he rode the elevator down to the lobby, Michael felt a mixture of excitement and disbelief. 24 hours ago, he had been a delivery driver with fading hopes of returning to his true profession. Now he was about to become CEO of his own company, with one of the world's most powerful corporations backing his vision. All because he had refused to let someone else's perception define his worth. All because he had seen a problem he could fix, and fixed it. Not for recognition or reward, but because doing good work was who he was, regardless of his job title. Outside the building, Michael paused to look up at the towering glass structure, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. It hadn't been easy. The years of rejection, the financial struggles, the blows to his self-confidence. But he had persevered, kept his skills sharp, and remained ready for an opportunity that had seemed increasingly unlikely to come. And when that opportunity had finally appeared, it had come from the most unexpected source. A woman who had initially dismissed him without a second thought, but who had been willing to reassess her judgment when presented with evidence of his abilities. There was a lesson in that, Michael thought as he hailed a cab to take him home. About perseverance, yes, but also about perception. How quickly we categorize others based on surface details, and how much we might miss when we do. 6 months later, Washington Home Intelligence launched its first product, an AI-driven home system that received rave reviews and quickly set new standards for the industry. The technology was lauded as revolutionary, and Michael found himself featured in the same business magazines that had once showcased Victoria Reed. At the product launch event, Victoria introduced Michael to the assembled press and industry leaders with genuine respect in her voice. "When I first met Michael Washington, he was delivering a package to my home," she said candidly. "I made the mistake of judging him by his job title rather than his abilities. It's a mistake our industry makes too often, overlooking talent because it doesn't come in the package we expect." She turned to Michael with a smile. "I told him if he could fix my home system, I'd call him boss. Well, today I'm proud to do just that. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michael Washington, CEO of Washington Home Intelligence and the true boss of smart home technology." As Michael stepped up to the podium to thunderous applause, he caught Victoria's eye and saw in her expression not just professional respect, but something more valuable, the recognition of an equal, a person worthy of being seen for who they truly were, not just what they appeared to be. And in that moment, Michael knew that the real transformation hadn't just been in his circumstances, but in the perspectives of both the woman who had once dismissed him and the man who had refused to be defined by that dismissal. They had both been changed by their encounter, reminded of old truths too often forgotten in the modern world. That worth isn't determined by title or position, that talent can be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes the most valuable thing one person can offer another is simply the chance to be seen.